This podcast contains strong language and examples of real-life scenarios that some may find disturbing. It is intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Jace Kelly, Virtus House Kennel Kast, and here we are again after the last interview with the Dirty Bearded Pilgrim. Hope you guys enjoyed that. We're into 2023 now, and we're starting with a cracker. Ben Mac, Queensland Police officer, ex-doggy, still copper in Queensland. Ben has a huge breadth of experience in Queensland Police as a doggy, and that's what we're going to focus on. So obviously it's a dog podcast, so that's where we're going to be. We're going to talk peripheral about how he got into police, etc., and we're going to talk post, but the main breadth of this conversation is going to be dogs. All right, let's do it. How are you, Ben?
Good, Jace. Good to see you, brother.
Excellent. Yeah, good to see you. It's been too long.
I'm trying to work it out before. I think, 2014, 13?
About 13, I think it was. Yeah. It's time flies. I'm a bit fatter, a bit older, so.
Makes two of us.
All right. Where did it all start, mate?
Mate, for me, Brisbane boy through and through. As a young fella growing up, my parents are both veterinary surgeons, so I guess ticking in the background, always had that interest in dogs. As a really, really young fella, I remember parents breeding, of all things, golden retrievers at the time, very briefly, and then Dad more probably working the vet life, I guess, that stage, a lot of long hours, long days, and whatnot. Mum was a vet too, probably did work more part-time, looking after us kids. High school, like a lot of families, I guess, parents separated and sort of off doing bits and pieces. For me, going through high school, I guess, local Brisbane school that was still running Army cadets at the time, so I was always interested in the military through Army cadets.
Okay.
Grade 12, through that sort of progression, had always been interested in heading off to ADFA. Small issue was the medical assessment, where I found out I was colourblind in a certain band that tied me over for that one. So I guess the other interest I'd always had was a couple of friends of the family, one in AFP and one in QPOL.
Okay.
At the time, so that had always been an interest as well. Without sounding silly, I guess always had, and you'd know this too, mate, the desire to do something for the betterment of the country, the community, to serve, I guess, at some level.
Absolutely.
An example of that too, I guess, as a young fella going through high school, volunteered at an organisation which was run by a retired Army officer who had been in the regiment in Vietnam.
Yeah, right.
Not that he told stories, but that the organisation he ran then was a charity that, off the back of his business as an outdoor education, a business at the time south of Brisbane, ran a charity to do with trying to do with a lot of stuff we're doing now with youth diversion, trying to run programs to help kids, through mentoring, through bushman skills, bushwalking, navigation, basic farm skills and whatnot. What
time frame is this?
Early 90s, 91, 92, 93, somewhere about there.
Pretty forward thinking.
It appealed, I guess. So as a backup plan, then went off and did what was then a Bachelor of Arts in Justice Administration at Griffith in Brisbane. I think it's referred to more as a criminology or degree these days.
Yep.
Applied, was lucky enough to get into QPOL first time. So January 98, headed off to the academy.
Okay.
Did my 6 months there.
Oxley? Still at Oxley, yeah.
Sworn in, headed off, did my grounding of 3 years in general duties, like most people did in those days, and then from there graduated. Not graduated, is probably the wrong word. Moved on. Having worked in the area I was working at the time, been exposed to some covert methodologies and investigations, and one thing that appealed to me at the time was surveillance. So I sort of picked up that bug.
Okay.
In those initial 3 years working at Logan, was exposed to the handlers in the Logan Dog Squad. And the capabilities of what those dogs could do.
Yep.
I was blown away as a young police officer at how talking to the handlers and then seeing it firsthand how dogs were trained to track, to a standard that those handlers could give evidence in court, and the case law and the precedents around it to be able to convince a jury or a magistrate at a lower level that they could say that based on their training and their regular training and the methodology went behind it, that person had run from point A to point B. And if that linked in with other evidentiary items scientifically, clothes are wearing, observations of witnesses and things like that,
Sure.
that provide a large role to play in then evidence gathering, or evidence to be tested in court. And that always appealed to me at the same time. We had some big jobs. I was working south of Brisbane at that stage, had some big sort of hectic jobs. Police officers shot at bank robberies.
Okay.
Back then, different scene. We had a lot of criminal motorcycle gangs that were hectic with each other. So there's a lot of sort of jobs where in that sort of risk space, officer safety space, everyone always appreciated the dog handlers turn up to support you.
Yeah.
And then had dogs that, we saw that when required at that level of use of force that could, apprehend offenders, quite violent offenders quite quickly and easily, and the confidence that brought to the frontline police, basically.
Yeah.
Mates, that always appealed, but at the same time, had this covert bug. I didn't want to be a covert operative, but enjoyed the surveillance skills. Obviously, you can't see the microphone, but at 6'7", I'm not. It goes well on the giraffe display at the museum. But no, and a lot of the surveillance, again, without going to methodology too much, was around mobile surveillance in vehicles, some foot stuff, but obviously within a team environment, I didn't do as much foot stuff and more car stuff.
Yeah,
I had a ball doing that for 5 years. Had some very fond memories. Worked some big jobs and big crooks without getting into too much detail.
That's early 2000s, eh?
2001 through to 2006.
Yeah, okay.
2006, mate, and then the dog fever was still ticking away in the background.
Yeah, right.
I was lucky enough to be supported by some good bosses at the time to jump out of surveillance for a bit and head back to work in some crime squads around Brisbane to get my resume back up and running, and then ultimately scored a spot working in Brisbane at the Brisbane Doggies mid 06, where I kicked off my first course.
Okay. Was that frowned upon, bouncing around to like a whole different way, or is that just the way it worked? You kind of surveillance, crime squad, whatever, then into doggies? Is it frowned upon back then? Or?
No, mate, not really. I think it was just like anything else, was merit-based. So
okay.
I was able to display, I guess, within short secondments back into uniform that I was highly driven and could work quite highly.
Yep.
And won a spot on merit. There had to be a number of vacancies and growth.
How cutthroat is that?
It was competitive back then, I think.
Yeah.
I haven't been involved in the doggies obviously for a couple of years now, but the panels back then, for the average constable position, especially in around southeast Queensland and some of the more regional centres, Cairns and Townsville, we'd be getting 50 to 60 applicants per job.
Jesus.
It's funny in my time how many commissioned officers you'll bump into with massive careers, and they'll look back, and one thing they always say is, I kind of wish I'd had a crack at the dog squad back in my day. They wouldn't be where they are now, but it's. Mate, I was blessed, lucky, blessed, fortunate are the words I use to describe being given that opportunity, and loved it. Loved every one of those 15 years doing it.
Awesome. All right, so go to the academy. Back to the academy for the dogs. So they were beside the academy, were they?
In the same real estate patch, but not under the academy's command per se.
Yeah.
So jumped on first course.
How long does that go for?
14 weeks.
Okay.
So for me coming in the dog squad mid 2006 I was very fortunate. It was at a stage where QPOL had we're investing money in purchasing bred dogs, and we're in the infancy of their own breeding program based on bloodlines that they'd purchased.
Yep.
The training cell had very experienced operational dog handlers rotating through and permanent staff, and a blend of ex-military working dog handler working there at the same time.
Okay.
Who's a character I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. But,
I do.
It was a great blend, and with a state coordinator who had been an ex-dog handler himself, both regionally and southeast Queensland. So I was fortunate enough that had a wealth of experience in the instruction cell side of things. Was in that period where I landed on my feet with a dog that was bought from a reputable breeder without sort of selling them per se.
Sure.
From New South Wales. Everything that could have lined up for me, and I enjoyed my 14-week course. Any of the boo-boos on that course were mine, and I made lots, as most handlers will know when they're novices, and instructors frustrated with me and vice versa. And mate, absolutely enjoyed the challenge, every bit of the challenge, everything from obedience to man work to tracking, searching in terms of being able to time commands, getting your head around the black and white of commands, praise, starting with early stages of food rewards right through to toy rewards and straight out praise. Loved the progression of everything to that 14 weeks, but knowing full well that 14 weeks was just a drop in the ocean for how much more training and effort went in to get the result and get the dog that I was working with 5 years later.
Yeah. You don't central kennel, do you?
No. So, different to the military working dog handlers.
Yep.
So dog handlers in my agency, the dog lives with the family. So the organisation pays for a kennel to be at home. Obviously, food, vet bills and stuff's all paid for by the organisation. But the added extra bonus for us is that bond, I guess. I wouldn't second guess the bond that the military guys have, but and girls have. But for us, yeah. So for me at that stage, recently engaged, my now wife, we yet to have first child. So two of us plus dog living at home. Yeah, the fine line between the pet and the working dog, but the bond, can't compare it. You know, days off together, working together, starting and finishing from home. Every night working together and having that constant. And again, not multi-handled either. So I was the only one to handle that dog from start to finish for his career. Police dog Tank.
Police dog Tank, German Shepherd?
Shepherd, working line Shepherd. Like I said, bred by one of the industry stakeholders.
Sure.
Could not have been more impressed with the product. Like I said, having seen other handlers and other dogs, and not, nothing breeders don't know. We don't always get it right. We're starting to mark traits. I was kissed on the proverbial with what I got first up.
Yeah.
No complaints at all.
So do you get that dog handed to you before course and then here's the leash, here's the dog, go home?
Early stages. So I hadn't transferred yet. Course hadn't started formally, but I've been advised I was on the course. So from memory, dog moved in with us probably 4 weeks prior to starting course.
Okay.
So I was still working other roles in surveillance. So every afternoon at work, obviously green, keen, straight home, out. Again, just basic obedience, just bonding stuff, throwing a toy, play, pat.
How do you know to do all that?
Again, so basic manual that they'd come up with.
Okay.
That's sort of progressed. It was in the infancy back then. QPOL now run an extensive foster program. So
okay.
Police officers and some of our civilian staff help out as well, where the instruction cell have a coordinator who maintains the development of puppies. So ones that we've purchased as puppies or bred, I believe QPOL still largely breed and do supplement with purchases where needed.
Yeah.
A handbook, a manual, accompanied by training days, training sessions, and the like.
Sure. Okay.
So quick outline. Again, coming from a family of dog breeders and 2 vet surgeons, a lot of trust, I guess. But a quick handover, a quick chat. Don't go teaching anything other than basic. Weren't teaching ball retrieve. The dog obviously already had it in spades, but just basic bonding stuff. Swim, fitness, ball, feeding, getting used to basic bits and pieces. Basic commands the dog had been already taught, I guess, or been exposed to through the development program. Your sit downs and stays.
Yeah.
But the first 4 weeks was just that, just getting used to the home environment, used to me. Again, lucky, dog bonded really quickly to myself. In the early stages, kept that for me. Moved on to more time with wife and stuff like that later on. But in that stages with me, and then obviously course kicked off 4 weeks after that.
Okay. What's a course look like? You got how many dog teams do you have on a course?
On my course, we had initially 3. We were joined by a 4th when another handler in the early stage of the course joined us in a re-team.
Was that normal for back then, or was that about the average?
Like everything's trying to keep things flexible and adaptable at the end of the day to try and keep as many dogs on the road as the organisation could.
Yep.
So that was a handler whose dog had passed away. Come and join us, I think about week 3 or week 4.
Okay.
The other 2 guys on course with me had been selected for positions at other squads within QPOL at the same time.
Yeah, right.
So it lined up that we were running through together.
Okay.
Course itself, obviously initial integration phases, but was guided by milestones all the way along. And again, a handbook to go with it. So think of a diary, I suppose. We would keep a diary every day, mapping and articulating everything we'd done, strengths, weaknesses, both the dog and ourselves. And then the instructor would make comment on that. So as part of those milestones, there'd be milestone reviews with the state coordinator and with ourselves, obviously working on our skills as well as noticing where the dog's at strength or weakness-wise.
Yeah.
Mix in that, obviously, other things, hip score, x-rays been done and sent off and been double-checked to make sure everything's above board in that space, making sure that we weren't going to work a dog that was going to have issues, pain or health otherwise in coming time. And there's an efficiency that obviously goes into working dogs that as much as you don't put a price tag or an economy on it, but those things kick in.
It's a business, yeah.
Again, lucky, perfect hip score at the week 4 mark, x-ray wise, and move through the milestones from there.
Okay.
I guess, over the 14 weeks, I thoroughly enjoyed, a lot of the shifts earlier on are earlier morning starts. Obviously, we had environments in and around the suburbs where we could access areas for early tracking, exercise, and obviously food driven at that stage, contamination free.
Yep.
working on different lengths of grass, wind, breeze, casting straight onto a track, casting across a track, and as the dog builds up his confidence and strength. And then obviously for me as a novice handler, the exciting part, getting to watch the body language change, the enthusiasm of the dog, knowing what the game involves, moving forward to a food reward at the end, moving on to a toy and play game, and then obviously towards the end of the course moving on to finding people.
Yep.
And then obviously moving further forward again and blending man work with the end of a track and watching that whole puzzle click in for the dog right towards the end of course. I mean, different dogs would finish course at different stages, absolutely,
Sure.
and then moving into a mentor phase with an experienced handler post-course and developing the dog further from there. And I guess my fondest memories were, I love course, don't get me wrong, it was a great time.
Yeah.
Anytime we get every weekend off goes well for a change. Mixture of mornings and afternoons as time went. Some long days, some frustrating days, some really rewarding days, seeing the penny drop for both myself and the dog.
Yeah.
And watch my other course participants go through the same joy and the same frustrations from time to time. But getting out in the real world and getting amongst it, and I was very fortunate to have a great mentor as well, who he'd in his own travels has been a doggy for probably 8 to 10 years prior to me.
Okay.
He had researched, I suppose, probably way to put it, done his background more in the sports dog environment just to check and balance that he wasn't missing anything that the QPS didn't have to offer. So
Okay.
I didn't say I'd pick up anything that we weren't teaching, just different ways of explaining, different exercises to draw out the same desired behaviour.
Yep.
So I was definitely blessed with the mentor I had, and then from there, just to develop through constant operational exposure to actual real world jobs and scenarios, blended with a great bunch of guys who love training as well, and the amount they put into training to expose myself and the dog as a team into as many different environments and scenarios as you can think of to bring out a product that I was really happy to work.
Yeah. So obviously your boy a shepherd, but the dog squad as a whole, all shepherds?
At that stage, all shepherds. There might have been 1 or 2 Roddies left at that stage. Maybe
Okay.
1 Roddie left, 2 Roddies left, and 1 Mal, I think, at that stage, without putting my finger on it specifically.
Yeah.
Again, prior to my time, there had been a period where the QPS relied on donation dogs.
Yep.
There was also a period in between prior to my time where some handlers, especially when they were returning for a reteam with another dog, off their own bat, had gone out and contacted breeders and bought their own dogs.
Yeah,
and
right.
It's a bit like like everything in any workplace, I guess. You get what management, you get what the organisation provides, and there's the better biro, the better sunnies you want to go and buy yourself, the better boots. Those guys went in the path of buying better dogs, and the QPS did look at for a short period of time there, recompensating them for that money, or claiming it on tax, whatever that might look like.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I was definitely fortunate that I'd gone past the donation stage, past the guys putting their hand in their own pocket stage, to a breeding program which our current executive at that time supported, and I was on the receiving end of that coming into fruition. So
Yeah,
I was
awesome.
extremely lucky.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so going through course, obviously from my time going through course, those guys that I went through course with, it's hard to explain to someone that's not a doggy, but you kind of you probably wouldn't like them out in the street, but because you're all going through the fight together and the struggle, it kind of really brings you together. And I actually am still really good mates with the guys that were on my dog course.
Oh, absolutely, and the same.
Yeah.
For me. The other 2 guys were now officers in charge of other dog squads within
Yeah,
QPS.
right.
Still both there, doing their thing. Chat to them every so often and doing really well for themselves. Still loving it. I don't know how at their age they're still managing it.
No, me neither.
But take my hat off to them. Great guys. Like I said, do stay in touch. I mean, the other good thing that QPOL do is they do try and get all the doggies together once a year. And obviously, 2 past that. One's their anniversary for the late Norm Watt, who was a doggy up in Rockhampton, who was murdered on duty some time ago now, late 90s. And we do get together with Norm's family and come together for a feed once a year.
Awesome.
And the executives support us on that and usually co-attend. It's been through different phases, some big nights with fundraising. It's been tied in with the RSPCA and Police Legacy and whatnot. Most recently last year, and again, I've left, so I take my hat off to the organisers. They did a really great job. We had the 50th anniversary of the QPOL Dog Squad, which mixed in with a few other bits and pieces. But at that forum, based on a symposium that had been run, was great to bump into and talk to some handlers from other states. I bumped into my travels over the years within Queensland, some New Zealand handlers, and for the first time getting to bump into and chat to some of the gang from your side of the fence. Some of the
Some on the military side.
some of the special operations guys, and
Yep.
then the more routine guys. You know, when you and I first crossed tracks from RAF and whatnot. So
Okay.
and again, multiple disciplines. It's always great. I always enjoyed jumping into as much as general purpose was my bread and butter.
Yep.
I was slightly exposed to some detection work through my first dog being cross-trained in Kadar and human remains, but I always had a lot of respect for the enthusiasm and the drive that goes into the detection gang and their discipline and what that goes. You know, their timing and commands, how they train the dogs and get that right.
Yeah.
To make sure they get it right operationally at the same time.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so we'll try not to jump back and forth too much. I know we kind of probably get lost in the conversation a little bit.
It's not like two blokes to do that.
So you've just got through course. You're out on the road. You've got a great mentor. How does that look?
Exactly that. Yeah, I had a couple of hurdles, obviously, operationally. I imagine military working dogs not that indifferent. You know, trying to expose the dog to different scent pictures, scenarios, especially different ages of tracks. So I guess, you know, the bread and butter for us was tracking offenders from burglaries, stolen cars and the like.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, stolen car, it might have been something as quick as a foot pursuit that's just started. It might have been the fact that you're on the other side of Brisbane and you've had to get over to that side of town. So there's a head start, I guess.
Yep.
But before the game of hide and seek kicks off, the dog you trained is getting your head around what that looks like. And what, obviously, for an older track, and being mindful of the strength and desire for the dog to get through that track, and his body sign language is going to be diminished or slightly different, and to be really in your line handling skills, be really careful on that. And other times, you know, as a super fresh track, you know, the dog would get out and it's like being behind a racehorse. You couldn't see because the sticks and the mud's all flicked up while I'm on this and we're going, and now he's not far in front of me.
Yep.
And again, find that balance. And that was half the fun too, you know, fresh tracks, older tracks, especially on the older tracks when you hit a fresh spot or you have the proximity alert, you see the dog's hackles up and the tail starts wagging, knowing that, you know, hey, Dad, we're really close, I've got him.
Yep.
And obviously, at some stages too, depending on the nature of the offender, it was a drink driver or something like that. 9 times out of 10, I could smell him myself. So, you're the corner of a unit complex or hiding behind an industrial bin, things like that.
Yeah.
Mate, my first dog track, believe it or not, and again, this is the other side of dog handling. It wasn't always for bad people. It was also for a lot of missing people.
Okay.
You know, some of our community dementia and whatnot had wandered off from nursing homes, wandered off from family. Sometimes small children too. Not so much. That was more the geriatrics I'd come across. To an extent, more so when I was working west of Brisbane, some bushwalkers and what we could do to help in that space.
Okay.
So aged tracks, but point being, there wasn't the criminal possibility of an apprehension at the end of it. So being extremely mindful of the dog and his body sign when we're getting close and the proximity alert to make sure there was no confusion on what the dogs would do at the end of it.
Yeah.
Absolutely, dogs are trained not so much to apprehend on first contact, but when they learn the game, it's something to keep in mind because a lot of the training's around the offender fleeing, the offender being armed, and making sure that safety aspect's there.
Yep.
But mate, I enjoy that too, as much as bringing, you know, to be able to help a geriatric find their way back to exactly that, the family that loved them a lot and had them walk off from the granny flat at the back or the nursing home at, you know, middle of night in winter when, you know, we still get down, you know, the odd 2 or 3 degree night in Brizzy and west of Brizzy where the cold becomes a concern. Those tracks were just as rewarding, but obviously had a different element to it. So I guess my first dog track was exactly that, a young lady who was in the middle of a mental health episode, and in doing so had shed every stitch of clothing that she was wearing and was running around a suburb in South Brisbane with multiple sightings. So not your standard track where an offender's trying to flee, having been caught doing a burglary or been very contaminated, very...
Do you have a start point?
Bird's nest. Had a start point, but she must have crossed back over that start point half a dozen times or a dozen times. Multiple yards, you know, trying to get drinks of water out of people's taps in a full meltdown and tracking into a backyard, stopping. Tracks come back out because she'd literally gone in multiple backyards. Not none could have been at the time, you know, trying to find more clothing, trying to find, you know, a pool to jump in. It was summertime towards the end of the year, warmer weather. Okay. Anyway, end up tracking, you know, finding her, and then lucky for me, I had my mentor with me at the time because it certainly wasn't something we were going to apprehend by the dog. So apprehending someone with a dog in one hand and one hand freed never comes off well.
Yep.
Long before we had tasers, so and not that was in that realm either. So have another police officer with me to go forward and bear hug the poor lady to get her to the ambulance was a bonus. But that was my first funny story. I remember coming home and telling my wife that finally the dog's off the mark. He's got one notch on his belt for an offender, and it wasn't an offender, it was a naked lady. So that was my first funny story, I guess, with that one. But mate, in between jobs on the mentor phase, because you're two up in a car rather than one up in a car when you move on from mentor phase, just in between every job. And again, great mentor. He'd always constantly organising unknown tracks for me to keep improving my ability to read the dog, and obviously my confidence at the same time, with a mixture of known tracks at the same time. But again, different age, cross tracks, contamination, picking the less affluent suburbs of Brizzy where, we know that there's, KFC boxes or dirty nappies in the backyard, all the lollies that dogs love to find, and getting him honed in on tracking and not as we call it, perving.
Yep.
So, I guess my biggest first hurdle out the road was definitely perving. He was one of those dogs that initially loved it, but the more we did tracks for known offenders, either with, fresh runaways and a frustration hide, or a leapfrog track, we found the offender, run off, give him a head start and go again.
Yep.
That desire, which then be rewarded, at times with no bite, behind a fence, behind a cupboard, behind a door somewhere, or behind a garage, under a unit complex or something like that, where the dog couldn't get to him but knew they were there, and have the offender come out.
Yep.
Some passive agitation mixed in with some, but point being no bite through the agitation process, put him back in the car and seething ready for the next one, knowing he'd missed out.
Yep.
The perving went away as quickly as it was a problem. It really hit his straps there.
Yep.
Obviously, the back end of that issue was making sure I had my eyes on him at every time, not letting him poke his head into dark spots I couldn't see, or check with a torch first to make sure.
Yep.
Much like you guys, we've got our rules of engagement or our use of force models. So in Queensland, we're obviously banned by a couple of bits of legislation that are pretty important, and making sure that we stick to those. But the underlying fact in those is that we can only use force, and this isn't just the doggies, it's any police officer. Mm-hmm. Force can only be just enough to get past the resistance that we're getting. And, it's got to be fair and reasonable and justified. So obviously accidental dog bites don't fit into that category. That's an area that needs to be looked at. So again, that was the other challenge, making sure to stay on top of that at the same time.
Okay. So you've said some words that triggered me there, some accidental bites. So obviously today, because I still work with a lot of organisations today, the dog has changed a lot, and he is very clear in the head. And they do identify friend or foe a lot now, so you don't get a lot of friendly bites. But back then, I would imagine they were a bit more land sharkish, happy to bite whatever's in front of them. Does that include you and your partner, or not really? Or
sometimes, at times, yes. So,
okay.
Operationally for me, with both my dogs, I'll get my second dog again, not jump back and forth.
Yeah.
Tank loved to bite. There's no two ways about it. He loved man work.
Yep.
To the point where when we have foster carers coming through the program, learning how to catch their first dogs on the arm, or the suit. Tank was one of the dogs we used that. You couldn't brick him. He was a joy to catch. However, having said that, the number of handlers that had dislocated shoulders and torn pecs from catching him.
Yep.
He was, you watch those YouTube clips of males competing in sports dog tournaments, launching from. He was that guy. He whether it be in training, and he knew training, he knew equipment association, he knew locations we'd often use. He loved it. He came out and knew what the game was. If anything, we had a couple of training hurdles with some recalls in the early stages.
Okay.
And whatnot. But the enthusiasm was there. Again, tail wag. It wasn't out of aggression. It was just out of pure joy and prey drive at the same time. 100%. Didn't have a huge defensive drive on him in the early days. It was something that we sort of brought out through suspicion and agitation, but his prey drive was always massive.
Okay.
A couple of kicks to the head from offenders and different times sorted the defensive drive out at the same time.
Yeah.
But he was a joy to work training wise for man work and on the track. Yeah, in that identification space, mate, I was lucky. Whether coincidence, no, it wouldn't be coincidence. Just through habit and practice. I didn't have any accidental bites that didn't involve, say, a grab on the clothing, grab on a shoe, grab on a backpack. And each of those occasions where you'd been in a scenario where you knew you were close upon looking at the dog, had the confidence to be able to call an offender within the risk space. So if it wasn't an armed offender I was tracking, it was a lower level one that wasn't from a job with a firearm or something like that, you'd have the confidence to know, right, I'm in the backyard, there's multiple sheds, someone's trampoline, an above ground pool, a deck, something where you knew the offender was pretty close. Yeah. To be able to get that point where to have the confidence to torch out and announce, who you were, what you were, and this is the opportunity to come out and give that multiple times. So then if you did move forward and through their choice of secretion, again, you have to justify, well, I've made every attempt I could.
Sure.
But in an accidental full mouth hole bite, I was never in that position, I guess. It was always ones where it might have been a nip at clothing or a nip at equipment or a backpack, something like that.
Okay. Lucky.
I guess in that space too, you talk about articles. So something else in the training course was obviously to pick up articles. For us, as police officers, obviously, we're always looking for gloves, knives, tools have been dropped on track, backpacks, beanies, things we can go DNA off. I mean, beanies are always great because you only need one hair strand, and if they've already got DNA profile on the system, that's a really crucial piece of evidence.
Yep.
And being able, then we still got evidentiary procedures to be able to say that's where the dog found it and testify if needed in court that was that, which might link the offender to the job, especially if they've gotten away at the back end of the track, they've gotten away in a car or something else that's prevented you from locating them on the track.
Okay.
Or contamination or something on the back end, I guess. Often articles were just as important. I had a number of successful identifications out of finding a hat, finding a beanie, finding a glove, something with a print on it. At times, yes, you'd have articles that he would have found, picked up in his mouth.
Yeah.
And I guess with age and experience, he found out that weren't as exciting. Might have got praise on mid-track at the time because the last thing is you're carrying a pocket full of food or a toy
Yep.
on an operational track, to the point where he would start tracking, especially if it's through long grass or a garden bed, and he'd pick up a beanie. And you really have to keep an eye on it in the dark because he'd run another 100 metres with it and then turn around and I'm sick of this now, spit it out. Oh, it's the beanie, obviously, for the offender.
Yeah, right.
How far back did you find that? Where did you get it from? We were teaching dogs to down on articles, which is great operationally, gives you a bit of breathing space, some fence crossings and things like that at the time. But as time goes on, and depends on the urgency of the job too. If it's an offender who's actively, like they usually are, actively looking to commit another break or steal another car on the track to get away, especially if they know that we're in behind. Or in this day and age, when I had this benefit on the back end of my dog career, Polair is a godsend. The eyes above, keeping an eye on us, especially with their technology. And the doggies all wear infrared trackers now too to make it even easier again.
Yep.
In that space, it had other hurdles along the way. But mate, answer your question, no. Training environment, definitely. The accidental bites, much like yourself, I've got scars from top to bottom.
Yes.
Because I was zigged when I should have zagged. But again, part and parcel of the agitator's rite of passage.
Yep.
There wouldn't be too many doggies having a stitch or two somewhere.
Yep.
Mate, operationally, Tank was definitely a dog that the head bubbled over. I remember doing a number of jobs, either a siege with cert or a siege just run at a local command level. Negotiators, the loudspeaker or the karaoke machine out the front, trying to negotiate a surrender and yelling back and forward to and fro. As his defensive drive started to develop, he'd have a sing along as well. So you did a job, whether it was be part of a surrender team or a session team or an EA team, with the dog ready to go. And as soon as the loud noises started, he'd join in. And you'd swear half the time he's yelling at him to give up as well. But as part of that, he would. Obviously, not so much in the heel position per se, but out of habit would either be in the heel position or between my legs. Mm-hmm. I learned very early in my time to try and keep him between my knees and lock him in. And when we changed, vest types, it was easier to deal with the more modern Molly tactical vest rather than the old 2-point harness we used to use.
Yeah.
Instead of having him out in front or beside me, I learned pretty quickly when he's beside me, he would do, and don't get me wrong, I'd be focused on what I was doing too. So it was something you paid attention to really well at the time. Mm-hmm. But the circles that little bugger would run in and give you a nip on the way past, and I'd get home from work and have, just little holes, sometimes bigger holes in my left calf muscle, and I looked down at my pants and they all had holes in them too, the point where I'd get home, my wife would say to me, what's happened there? Trying to explain how I had all these small puncture marks in my pants and my leg. So I learned pretty quickly tucking in between my legs, not so much with my second dog. But mate, definitely the training environment. I did have one other cracker bite one night, and if this handler's listened, he'll remember it. I remember being in the office one night, almost at knock-off, 4 a.m, catching up on paperwork and whatnot. Heard on the radio pursuits coming past. Now, that was in Brisbane, which is obviously where handlers stay when they're on course as well. So a young novice handler was out in the car park waiting to get picked up to go off to the early morning tracking. Been on course a couple of weeks. He's got his dog, of all things, giving it a brush at 4 a.m, waiting to get picked up. I've come flying out the door of the office, trying to run to where my car was to get in to go and head off to this pursuit. Can you imagine the poor bloke's not expecting the door to fling open and bang? His dog had no problems with prey drive. Yeah. Mate, I got as far as a car and, right in the back door. I remember having a race off. Still did the job, mind you, by the time he got the dog off me. Yeah, right. Did the job, got home and trying to explain to my wife a dog bite literally on that spot between, in the middle. And no stitches, luckily, but certainly an owie that was going to last for some time. But no, my other ones, definitely. Mate, I was sitting looking at my hands talking, the puncture marks on my wrists, arms, hands, forearms, sometimes equipment failures. There's always that sneaky one that sneaks through the laced arm or the suit where there was a tooth the last couple of times. Yep. And that's on us, obviously, keeping track of our equipment, making sure it's where it's at and it's got the if it's worn out, to replace it. Other times, just a straight out miss. Dogs going for spots and getting the hand in the wrong spot. Or a dog that got cheeky and went for the leg or the ankle when they couldn't reach the frustrate. And again, as an agitator, that's me, through not planning things properly or depending on the bite you're trying to develop. Mate, all part and parcel of it, good for a giggle and
Yeah,
someone
yeah.
will usually has your bottle of rum out of it anyway. So.
Absolutely. Just to go back for a sec, because we do have the odd person that isn't a dog person. So when you say your dog is on a track and they start to get excited when they're close to a person, so we're talking about a prox alert or a change in behaviour when they get closer because they're starting to smell the person or whatever they're tracking.
Yep.
Can you explain that?
Yeah,
just
so
a
sure.
tiny
So
bit?
early stages of dog tracking, obviously, it's all based on ground tracking. So, going right back to early stages, we'd be using food, keep the dog's concentration, the dog's nose on the ground, and use food to help them to associate footprints and scent transfer. So, without going to too many laws of transfer and contact and whatnot, but so imagine, pick an easy one, a barefoot offender running along a footpath, grass, whatever, leaves their scent behind, their personal BA behind, whether it be on the track or above the track in a cone, so to speak.
Yep.
Obviously, there's an element of contact or transfer, so whether it be a barefoot or a rubber shooter person, and that contact, things like, it might be disturbed dirt, it might be disturbed gravel on a bitumen surface, which is obviously a bit harder.
Yep.
In grassy areas, imagine a football field, there'd be nice footprints. If it's winter, you might get a bonus, and there's footprints in the dew that you can help pick up in the moonlight to help you know you're definitely on track.
Yeah, that'd be handy.
And that's what the dogs learn. So they obviously learn, and that's part of us being able to give evidence in court that I've trained the dog to do this on that track, or I actively saw the dog that. And obviously a change in direction is a huge one, watching the dog move past or shoot past a corner on a track. So if you imagine, pick a football field, and that was always a good one as a tester, so more of a pattern track on a football field where the track would literally hit the middle of an oval and do a 90-degree turn. And for the handler to be able to see the dog overshoot the corner, cast, so when I say cast, we're moving the dog around in circles, keep the dog moving. And then the dog, upon finding the track, a dog that's obviously moved into its confident space and trained well, will literally snap, will literally do a backflip and lock back on and take 1 or 2 seconds for a quick pause, double check, and you literally see them go, yep, this is it, and you can see the head ticking over. Tank used to almost religiously look over his shoulder as if to say, we're back on.
Yeah, right.
And we'd be
Awesome.
away. And the body language. So it's, to explain, it's not a run, it's more of a, it used to remind me of a tank. It's the track's moving on a tank. The dog would be, the body position would be there, the legs would be the springs, but very methodical.
Yep.
Tank used to get like a bunny hop, both legs and his back legs together when he's on track. There was his little comfort of, I'm on, we're on this, we're going really well. Tail will be dead straight. Proximity alert, so when you get close to an offender, the dog's head would come up, and you could almost see his head would come up and look around left and right, and the scent's obviously higher. It's fresh, it's sitting up off the ground, it might be swirling in behind a unit complex or an industrial premises. It might be in a creek bed. It might be in a thick pocket of bush with that sense around. Obviously, come the end of a track, a lot of offenders are in panic mode, a bit more adrenaline starting to pump out. They've tried to find different spots to hide. And that was the other fun thing too, is, you imagine school, for example. An offender might run and hide in a school. They might pick half a dozen port racks up on a roof, under somewhere, trying to find a cupboard, tried a few door handles. So if the dog will be getting excited, picking different spots, so now suddenly got fresh scent all over him, trying to find where he went out of all that muddled scent.
Yep.
And quite often, and sometimes you do tracks where you come to a spot where it had a muddle like a school, and the offender's finally decided, no, I'm not going to stay here, I'm going to keep going. Finding the exit route obviously could be as much of a challenge sometimes to get back on the singular track ascent. But so displays, be seeing the dog be head up, excited. Tank could definitely wag his tail. Depending on the environment, once or twice, not hackles up, hair standing up out of excitement.
Okay, yep.
But the look, the body language, the change, especially in the second half of his career when the confidence is there, he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
There, and I'd see him turn, tail will be up wagging, and you'd almost see him sometimes look as if to say, too late now, Dad's already seen that, I've found him. But you'd see sometimes he'd almost do the old, I'm just turning around for a quick look, and there's the offender right there behind the shot. And it took me a while to make sure I kept a hold of that. Obviously, it all comes back to line control.
Yeah.
Me getting down the line as much as getting the line back in as quick as I could. So I guess, like you said, our non-dog listeners, a bit like fishing, I guess. Casting with a fishing line, the fish on there, you're using the line to try and get back down and close to the fish, and he's a bit the same. And then obviously making sure that if the decision was made based on the circumstance in front of me and in compliance with legislation and policy, if it was an apprehension, kicking in with that command and then obviously the back end of that is minimising the impact that the dog would have as far as an injury goes to an offender, recalling the dog as fast as possible, getting the offender secured to minimise the injury. But the body language, the change is always something that you remember going, aha, we're here now.
Yeah.
Although at times you'd go, oh, we're here now, and then after a couple minutes searching, realise, nah, bugger, the track's off again. We've had a hot spot. And that's the other half of the fun of it as well.
Yep.
But, head up, tail wagging, a cockiness, I suppose, just that look over his shoulder of, he's here somewhere. And I said at times, if it was a drink driver or someone who consumed, booze, whatever, or they've had a cigarette while they're hiding, you'd pick that up as well myself. I'd know that we're pretty close.
Yeah.
I mean, I can remember saying to myself, and as you do, like you talk on track, body-worn cameras only came in the back end of my time in the dog squad.
Sure.
I'm sure if we went back and watched half of them, you can hear me having chats with the dog, be praising on corners or, murmuring things like, the track goes that way, does it? Or something like that. Or I remember one time coming in the backyard, I remember saying to the dog, mate, I can smell him. If you can't find him, there's something wrong. As he's trying to work the scent out. And then sure enough, you can see an ankle sneak back underneath the trampoline in someone's backyard and knew where he was.
Yeah.
Just that teamwork, I suppose, together. You get to know each other's traits and all the rest of it. And he knew if I start pulling down the line that chances are I'd seen the offender. I mean, a couple of times I would have found the offender visually before he had. And if I started yelling, again, head up, he's looking around what Dad's yelling at, trying to lock in on the offender at the same time as I'm trying to pull him back in as quick as I can, just to make sure there was no contact. And, at times you did. You have offenders who you'd startle them and they're, whether it be the BS story or giving up and knowing who you were and what you're up to, or the other, coming for a fight, whether they knew police or not. And again, just their adrenaline kicking in and their fight mode kicking in. He was always pretty quick to jump up and look around when you start yelling. Yeah. But I remember one funny story. It was actually State of Origin night one year, and this fella had way too much on his belt. Bigger boy. Mm-hmm. Had found himself into a town complex where he didn't live, completely lost. Again, under the weather. Again, job had come in for someone trying to break into cars. The intent I hadn't sort of got into, but I remember the memory for me was tracking and finding this guy drunk in a car. And someone left a car unlocked in this tennis complex. He's hopped into it. I don't think the criminal intent was there, just the lost and drunk.
Yeah, sure. Wanted to sleep.
So it wasn't in that space. So pulling the dog back, trying to yell at him. So not as intoxicated. He's looking at me in a set of ink blue uniform that doesn't always. At that stage, QPOL was still wearing light blue shirts for uniform, like the ink they're wearing now.
Yep.
Whereas we're in the ink overalls or field dress two-piece. For me, yelling at him, again, probably torching his eyes, trying to explain to who I was. He wasn't listening.
Right.
I don't think he could if he tried.
Yep.
But the dog knew what the game was. So as he's desperately trying to think, well, Dad's yelling, I'm going to have a crack at this one, somehow in the midst of me getting the poops on with him and a bit of a correction down the line, trying to snap him back, the dog and I met at face level in amongst him being frustrated.
Oh, shit.
So I actually split between my nose and my top lip straight open. But then the other side was the assisting police turning up lights and signs after me requesting urgent assistance, seeing me with blood pouring out my face and trying to explain to them as quickly as I could. That wasn't the offender, that was the dog. Go easy on him. And getting that out pretty quickly as well. And then the embarrassment of sitting up at A&E with your dog bit you and trying to explain to the nurse that how's a dog that's 2 foot off the ground managed to bite me on the face at 6'7". But yeah, mate, there are other things too, tracking and finding offenders where you put the dog up into a high spot to search and you hadn't quite got up there yourself, or the frustration that the dog seeing the offender fleeing and trying to get between you and you getting in the way. Yeah, there's been other ones. I remember having a proper stink with a fella who'd been involved in a pursuit one day. Again, another large gentleman, had some gear on board. And he'd come out from the outset. He'd the pursuing police officer was on our high patrol traffic branch back in those days, and he'd initially got into the tangle with this guy, a smaller police officer, great guy, and I remember he'd pull out his baton to try and strike the offender, to try and take him into custody, and this guy was a big boy. Obviously loved his vitamin S and doing his thing, and it was on. I remember as I've pulled up watching the offender reach out and grab the baton and catch it with his mitt and just snatch it. And I remember thinking, we're on here. Again, deployed the dog from the back of the car, roadside, apprehended the offender, who put on one hell of a struggle. So it took me, the other police officer, and the dog to get him down. Okay. But some stage in that struggle, I remember the offender going to kick me in the head. Mm-hmm. And as I reached up with my right arm to block it, you can guarantee what the dog did. He jumped up to apprehend the same leg. Found me first. And it's hilarious. You look back now, but there's a pregnant pause of the offender looking at me going, sucked in, that must hurt. Me very clearly articulating that it hurt a lot. And then the dog trying to get as fast as he could, both canines top and bottom out of my forearm, watching him at the same time, trying to relocate and get back onto him at the same time. Again, another one explained the nurses up at Marta A&E. But no, it definitely had bites, definitely had nips. Scars and all the rest of it. Sure. Part of the memory.
Definitely. So obviously your type of criminal would change through the years and all that kind of thing. Back then, was there the case that you may track, not you, but Dog Squad in general, would track into like an ambush situation at all, or were they not that kind of switched on?
No, definitely, 100%. So my second dog, Kadar, one of his brothers, been handled by a dog in Brisbane. It was well publicised at the time. Had tracked an offender who did stab the dog on track. So I know of ambush. Well, okay, go back to Norm Watt. Didn't have his dog out. Actually, I'll take a step back. I'm 100% sure he had his dog out before my time in the dog squad. That was an ambush, obviously, not close quarter, but the offender did shoot and murder Norm Watt.
Yep.
At times, ambushes, yeah. I mean, I definitely came across ambush is the definition, not an armed ambush, not a set-up ambush, nothing like the tragedy we saw up at Tara last year.
No.
But definitely had occasions where I came across more than one offender together who thought, we've got a chance here, let's give it a go.
Yeah.
And lucky for me, when it was on, after repeated warnings and doing my bit in the justification space, the dog had one and I had the other.
Okay.
Mate, definitely occasions. I won't say it doesn't happen, but no, not a regular thing.
Sure.
Much like you guys, I suppose. I know you're probably working more in teams, I guess, in the military. But, yeah, at times it's just you and the dog. You could be miles away from anywhere. You tracked an offender into a vast part of bushland, pine forest for the sunny coast.
Yep.
An area where you do know. And there's always been those jobs where the hair stands up the back of your neck.
Mm-hmm.
One of the jobs where you pull up stumps quickly. Obviously, in the latter half, get poleated or scanned in front to help with that.
Yep.
I did. I had a couple of jobs there before I moved on where offender had done a stick-up or was suspected of being armed. And I had the advantage then of the helicopter coming down low, being able to light them up with the night sun.
Yep.
Then being able to call out the loudspeaker. And at the same time, me being able to yell out. One of the times I've had where I knew they were there, could see them visually and call on them. And you almost go to a negotiation stage, I guess.
Sure.
And we'd got around it. I touch wood. Had a couple of close calls where afterwards I thought, gee, could have gone either way. But,
okay.
But yeah, the element's always there, 100% it is. But I wouldn't say it's a regular thing, but it's always your worst fear, I guess, at the same time.
Indeed.
And more so after last year.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, on that mark, we'll just leave it there for today's episode. So just to cover everything for everyone, Ben's done his time at the academy. He's done his time on the street before going to Dog Squad, and then we're just in the early stages of his career as a dog team with PD Tank. So stick around. Episode 2 coming up.
In the next episode, we continue to delve into the multifaceted world of police dog work, discuss working dogs within the family environment, the strong bond formed off duty, and the harrowing 2011 Grantham Floods search and rescue mission.